for Nicholas Literski, a practitioner's perspective on the Smith family Holiness to the Lord Parchment. Greg Kofford will be reading for Nicholas, but a little background on him. Nicholas is an adjunct senior lecturer in psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies and a professional spiritual guide. Dr. Literski's research interests include spirituality, Paleolithic cave art, ceremonial magic, Mormon history, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Nick's work has been published in the Farms Review of Books on the Book of Mormon, as well as in multiple scholarly journals and anthologies in the field of depth psychology. Their recent co-authored book, Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration, was published by Greg Kofford Books in 2022. Dr. Literski has previously presented on topics related to Mormon history, Freemasonry, and ceremonial magic at conferences of the John Whitmer Historical Association, the Mormon History Association, Sunstone, as well as various other podcasts. I'd like you all to welcome Greg Kofford reading for Nicholas.
We're just making sure the slides were going to work, so. Historian Tabitha Stanmore observed that in one form or another, magic is consistent in all societies across the world and throughout time. The fact of its presence is never a novelty. As D. Michael Quinn and others have demonstrated, magic is unquestionably present within the Mormon past. Rather than fearing magic as somehow at odds with the religious claims of Joseph Smith Jr. and his family, we should consider it as one of the many lenses by which we can better understand the Mormon Restoration writ large. The Holiness to the Lord Parchment, passed down through the descendants of Hyrum Smith, is an important vehicle to this understanding. After LDS Patriarch Eldred G. Smith began to publicly exhibit the Smith family's 3 magical parchments in 1979, they soon began to attract study. Initially, they were believed to be Masonic in nature, an assumption refuted by Arturo de Hoyos, Grand Archivist of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. A more thorough analysis appeared 5 years later in Quinn's Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. Quinn and his successors have added to our understanding, primarily by finding parallels in various historical documents, but they have also suffered from a lack of context. Just as the intersection of Freemasonry and Mormonism was occluded for many years due to researchers who were only familiar with one culture or the other, scholarship on Smith family parchments has lacked the perspective of practicing ceremonial magicians. When Quinn's work was first published, I was inspired to seek out some of the primary sources, including magical grimoires. I found the material intriguing, but also vague, confusing, and overwhelming. Years later, after gaining my own experience as a practicing magician, these books suddenly emerged as if from a dense fog. I soon realized they were written by practitioners for practitioners, assuming a level of context and experience that others would never fully grasp. My intention today is to bring this experience to the Smith family Holiness to the Lord Parchment. Unlike the other 2 charms handed down with it, the Holiness to the Lord Parchment is more properly referred to as a layman. How do I do this? Okay, there we go. Operator error. What is a layman? A layman, not to be confused with or pronounced like the Book of Mormon, layman, is a sacred image or chart typically made on metal, perfumed wax tablets, or pure white paper with convenient colors, and used for the purpose of ritually invoking one or more spirits. The elements and arrangement of the Smith family layman demonstrate, as I will explain, that it was carefully constructed to both invoke a good spirit and protect the wearer from temptations. The classic source describing the description of the layman was Pseudo-Agrippa's 1559 fourth book of occult philosophy, but much of Pseudo-Agrippa's work was directly reproduced in 1801 by Francis Barrett in the Magus. Copies of the Magus made their way around the world, including the United States, where it provided the template for Joseph Smith's Jupiter talisman. As noted by Quinn and others, the direct connection to the Smith family is established by the fact that the Jupiter talisman reproduced a very specific printing error from the Magus. According to the Magus, a layman may certainly be square, circular, or triangular, or of the like sort. In its center, the magician should draw a six-cornered figure containing the name of either a star or a governing spirit who holds authority over the spirit the magician wishes to invoke. In the outer corners of the layman, the magician should draw a minimum of 4 pentagons or more, depending on the number of spirits being invoked. Whoops. Additional details of the layman would depend on the particular nature of these spirits. Various images called sills or pentacles were a vital part of the layman, to the point that magicians frequently referred to their laymans as sacred pentacles. According to the Magus, these pentacles are certainly holy signs, characters, preserving us from evil chances and events, helping and assisting us to bind, exterminate, and drive away evil spirits, alluring the good spirits and reconciling them to us. These pentacles consist either of characters of good spirits or of superior order, or of sacred pictures of holy letters or revelations with apt and proper versicles, which are composed either of geometrical figures and holy names of God, according to the course and manner of many of them, or they are compounded of them, or many of them mixed. As a general matter, these images were to be surrounded by a double border containing the name of the angel, one or more divine names, or a scriptural reference related to the layman's desired effects. The Smith family layman follows these basic conditions, beginning with various protective pentacles or seals. First, it contains a talisman that is readily available in the popular 1825 book, The Astrologer of the 19th Century by Robert Cross Smith, writing under the pseudonym Raphael. This talisman promised that he that beareth this sign about him shall be holpen in every need or necessity. Second, the layman contained a sill of the earth from Ebenezer Sibley's new and complete illustration of the celestial sciences, promising that whosoever beareth this sign need fear no foe. Third, the layman included a polygonal figure which combined the great character and the greatest character illustrated by Sibley. The Smith version contained the divine names Tetragrammaton, made up of syllables written in the external points of the figure, and Adonai, written in full in the center. Fourth, the Smith layman included seagulls from the Sibley representing the angels Pa, Lipa, and Nalga, both of which were intended to uplift the mind of the wearer and protect them against various threats posed by evil spirits. Next, the double border of the Smith family layman contained 2 key elements. First, a versicle or short biblical passage of importance was written 3 times. Second, the tetragrammaton motif was written in the form of its standard 4 Hebrew letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, repeated 3 times. This border, with its scriptural references and divine names, served as a container and bound for the layman much like a magical circle. The laymen also contained elements intended to attract good spirits, which the magician wished to conjure. Another seal, also from Sibley, promised that whosoever beareth this seal, all spirits shall do him homage. At the center of the layman was a 12-pointed star, an innovation from the 6-pointed star specified in the Magus, containing the name Raphael. This would indicate that the Smith family layman was specifically intended to invoke a spirit that was subject to the governance of the archangel Raphael. Segments of the Raphael star contained additional spirit and divine names written in Hebrew. Notably, every one of these names appeared in a chart of planetary correspondence within the Magus. The Smith family layman was intricately constructed using standard magical books of the time for the purpose of guarding against evil spirits and invoking a good spirit. Its alignment with spirit invocation practices of the time set it apart as from the other two Smith parchments, which were mere charms. The perspective of a practicing ceremonial magician therefore clarifies aspects of the layman which have not been previously well understood. Astrology or something else. While the Smith layman was dominated by powerful magical symbols, a careful examination reveals more subtle details. For example, all of the symbols of the Zodiac and the known planets were present. The immediate temptation is to examine this arrangement as a nativity chart, reflecting the positions of the planets at the time of some birth or momentous event. If this was true, one could reverse engineer the date referred to in the layman by starting with the positions of the outer planets. In this case, Saturn appears in a rare direct opposition to Uranus. Uranus is in Cancer, while Saturn is in Sagittarius. Within the decades surrounding the Mormon Restoration, these conditions were only met between July 13, 1781 and January 12, 1782. This rules out reference to an event since we think of the Restoration beginning with Joseph Smith's 1820 religious pondering. The range does, however, fit the birth date of a figure related to Mormonism's founding. John Smith, uncle of Joseph Smith, was born on July 16, 1871, just 3 days into the required alignment. These implications would be intriguing, possibly even requiring a revision to the layman's traditional provenance. The layman was allegedly preserved by Mary Fielding Smith, the wife of Hiram Smith, who passed it to their son John Smith and thence down through the Latter-day Saint patriarchal office. Between young John came of age, however, Uncle John Smith served as LDS Church patriarch. If the Smith family layman contains a nativity chart for Uncle John Smith, then it would likely have originated with him rather than Hiram. As an alternate possibility, the layman could portray a horary chart. When a client brought a question to an astrologer, the latter would take note of the exact time and cast a chart for that precise moment. Based upon the positions of the planets and zodiac signs, the astrologer would then provide a divinatory answer. If the layman portrayed a horary chart, it would have been in the last half of 1781 or the beginning days of 1782, making it wholly unrelated to Mormon restoration. There are, however, serious problems with both of these hypotheses. Neither the nativity nor a horary chart would include a double representation of Saturn as the Smith family layman does, nor would they include a double representation of Aries, which also appears in the layman. Either chart would have included Mercury, which is missing from the layman. The horary chart is especially ruled out since the 1781 to 1782 timeframe predates the 1784 publication of Ebenezer Sibley's new and complete illustration of the celestial sciences, from which other features of the layman were directly copied. In short, the internal evidence proves that the Smith family layman did not contain either a nativity or a horary chart. Even if the Smith family layman did reflect such a chart, it would be impossible to determine its true significance. Placing my isolation of the planets and zodiac symbols side by side with a full layman suggests that the planets and zodiac figures were added to the layman after the major magical images had been drawn. They were squeezed in, fit as close to their intended location as possible, but within the constraints of the remaining open space. This destroys any certainty in calculating a precise date. Another explanation must exist for the inclusion of these figures. Working from my isolation of the planetary and zodiac figures, I indicate which house, i.e. the triangular segments of the chart, each zodiac figure would have properly held. The magician seems to have tried to redraw Aries closer to its own house. More importantly, the magician drew the figure for Saturn within 2 different houses. The answer to this mystery lies in the century-old practice of geomancy, which derives from geo meaning earth and mancy meaning a system of divination. Geomancy, which had its roots in the 7th century Islam, began with tossing sticks or stones to create random holes in the sand, but later shifted more towards casting lots. Works such as the 4th book of occult philosophy, John Hayden's 1664 Theomagia, and Robert Cross Smith's 1825, The Astrologer of the 19th Century, instructed astrologers and magicians on this system. Geomantic castings created a set of random figures matching 16 recognized patterns. By one popular method, each of the 16 patterns was attributed to particular planets. The resulting planets were then arranged in the houses of a traditional astrological chart, allowing the magician to obtain insight regarding specific influences upon the client's question. Astrological geomancy was thus a poor man's astrology, freed from the need to make complicated mathematical calculations. The geomantic house chart fulfilled all of the same functions as a horary chart, allowing the magician a method to answer their client's immediate questions. Notably, the process for creating a geomantic house chart allowed for planets to appear in more than one house. In fact, planets inevitably appeared more than once in a geomantic house chart, since there were more houses than planets. At the same time, a planet could be entirely absent, its geomantic figure not having appeared in casting the lots. As with astronomical horary chart, the casting of a geomantic house chart seeks divination to answer a specific question. It is not possible to reverse engineer what the question was, and given the squeezed-in position of the planets on the Smith layman, some of their proper positions cannot be precisely determined to begin with. That said, the inclusion of a divinatory geomantic chart on the layman would suggest that the question had something to do with the purpose for which the layman was constructed, that being the invocation of a spirit. Whatever the original question, the magician must have believed that the divinatory response was not only positive, but somehow enhancing the layman's power. Mysterious characters. The final mystery that has plagued those attempting to understand the Smith family layman. Within the final border of the layman on 3 sides, the magician repeated a string of characters that have never been deciphered. Quinn was unable to find a source for these characters, speculating that they constituted a substitution code for some unknown name. Based on the use of specialized alphabets to encode magical names in the Magus and elsewhere, this was not an unreasonable assumption. Others have proceeded on this same substitution code hypothesis, including Dan Vogel, who consulted with Joseph H. Peterson, a respected scholar of magical history and grimoires, to no avail. Having a somewhat larger network of academics and other specialists in the fields of magical practice and history, I also consulted several of my own contacts, none of which were able to decipher the inscription. One challenge with the substitution code hypothesis is that a number of characters in the inscription cannot be determined with any certainty. Quinn discerned 9 separate characters, while Vogel believed there were only 7. In my original investigation of the inscription, I had to assume that a substitution code was used. One character, for example, closely resembles the Greek letter epsilon, which seems to encourage the substitution code hypothesis. In searching the Magus, I found 2 figures which resembled the I and the sideways S figures of the inscription. These, however, were simple descriptors for good spirits, representing perpendicular and separate. Consulting Fred Gedding's exhaustive Dictionary of the Occult, Hermetic, and Alchemical Sigils, I found that the character somewhat resembling a Jupiter symbol appeared as a signifier for still in the 1701 lexicon Pharmaceutico Chemicum. I also searched Edmund Fry's Pantographia, a commonly available 1799 work containing over 200 then-known alphabets, and found only limited resemblance to a few random letters. Based on my various attempts, I am convinced that these mysterious characters do not represent a simple substitution code. Dan Vogel recently announced his own speculation that the inscription consists of 7 characters, each representing one of the Chaldean planets. This approach has some merit, given that one character resembles the moon and another resembles a modified Jupiter symbol. Vogel's theory, which he was careful to qualify as pure conjecture, posited that the inscription was derived from a string of planetary symbols in a 1750 chapbook, The High German Fortune Teller. As Vogel demonstrated, these symbols varied considerably in subsequent other publications through 1827. While Vogel deserves praise for his deep research and innovative approach, there are problems with this hypothesis. First, the High German fortune teller characters are portrayed as part of a common charm to force a thief to return stolen goods. The text of this charm is important. Put down the minute when the goods were stolen and the planet ruling the day. So this is done, put down the following characters on a fair piece of parchment. So turn round thrice, and if you hear no news of the thief in 24 hours, as 10 to 1, you will prick the parchment full of holes and hang it up the chimney where the heat of the fire may a little scorch it, and the thief will be so restless that he will bring back the goods. The Smith layman, as explained earlier, does not reliably specify an exact date, let alone minute. Further, the Smith layman is far more complex in its construction than the simple charm from the High German fortune teller. Vogel could argue that the magician who constructed the Smith layman adapted characters at random without regard for their context of thievery. This, however, would be at odds with the layman's otherwise careful and clearly intentional design. My own research and experience convinces me that nothing in the Smith layman was random. I believe that a more useful approach would be to consider this inscription within the context of its usage. Researchers might derive good direction from the title of Vogel's presentation video, Joseph Smith, the Necromancer. Interestingly, Joseph Smith's uncle, Jesse Smith, accused his nephew in 1829 of obtaining the gold plates by necromancy, an owner only later claiming that an angel revealed the location with a promise of great wealth, gold and silver, and precious stones, so that he should have the dominion of all the land of Palmyra. Necromancy stems from necro, meaning dead, and mancy, meaning divination, hence divination by means of the dead. Notwithstanding lurid tales of raising corpses from the grave, the vast majority of necromancy involved invoking the shades of spirit or spirits of the dead in order to obtain information. While some of the detailed rituals of necromancy differed between various sources, the wearing of a layman has been a consistent part of the ceremony. The layman contains images intended to protect the wearer from the potential risks of necromancy. Sibley wrote that while a magician could certainly call forth the spirits of the dead and bind them without any evil influences, safeguards were called for. Too often, he suggested, the officious attitude could lead the magician to enter into unholy contracts. This helps explain why the Smith family layman is predominantly filled with protective elements. The layman's elements to attract and invoke a spirit, on the other hand, seem to be relatively few at first glance. The border with its versicle and divine name served its double purpose as already described. The Sibley seal was included, causing all spirits to pay homage to the magician. The pentagram was drawn in each corner. The central star was added, which according to the magus, should contain the name and character of the star or of the spirit, his governor, to whom the good spirit that is to be called is subject. This later figure, understood properly, might be good-naturedly thought of as the magician's century-old tradition of being a Karen, calling the manager in order to get desired service from one of their subordinates. For good measure, the magician added multiple angelic and divine names to this later figure, again drawing upon authority to command a target spirit. The observant viewer might notice by now that every element of the Smith family layman thus far relies upon just three sources. Francis Barrett's The Magus, published in 1801, Ebenezer Sibley's new and complete illustration of the celestial sciences, published in multiple editions beginning in 1884, and Robert Cross Smith's The Astrologer and the 19th Century, published in 1825. All three of these volumes, as noted by Quinn, were available in the New England of Joseph Smith's time. Even the most rare of these, the Magus, has already been firmly established as an influence on Joseph Smith. This suggests that we look primarily to those sources in order to understand the thrice-repeated mysterious characters of the Smith family laymen. Francis Barrett included a small section of the Magus, which was allegedly composed by Johannes Trithemius, a Benedictine abbot and occultist whose lifespan bridged the 16th and 17th centuries in Germany. The section of the Magus added condensed specific instructions on how to conjure spirits to visible appearance. With regard to the use of the layman in this ritual, the Trithemius directed the aspiring musician to hang the pentacle around thy neck for added clarity. Trithemgallius provided helpful drawings of each tool used in conjuration, including the pentacle or layman. This example provided the same basic requirements as described elsewhere in the Magus. This layman is intended to aid the magician in conjuring Michael, who is an archangel, had no other superior spirits to call upon as influence. First, Michael's name was included in both English and Hebrew. Finally, the center of the star containing the sigil of Michael. The spirit's name of sigil was typically written 3 times in any layman intended to summon them. Each time it was written in a different language or alphabet, the latter of which the Magus helpfully provided several. The sigil, however, provided something special. The sigil was a figurative drawing unique to each spirit. One might readily notice that the sigil has no relationship to known human languages, or rather seems almost random in shape and appearance. It cannot be translated, nor is a substitution code. For certain well-established spirits who had a long history of working with the magician, sigils were known and provided in books such as the Magus. Knowing a spirit's true name as reflected in their sigil was a key to obtaining the spirit's future cooperation. For other spirits, however, such as spirits of the dead, one might conjure an act of necromancy. It was up to the magician to obtain a sigil directly from the spirit in question. Once this was obtained through a pact with the spirit, the magician had the option of calling upon the spirit at future times with a much abbreviated ritual. Looking back to the Smith layman, the only Name written in English is Raphael, whose name is also written in Hebrew. The sigil of Raphael, however, is absent, despite being readily available in Magus and other works. Therefore, the magician clearly regarded Raphael as a superior to some other spirit who was the intended target of the layman. Based on the magical text which formed the source of the Smith layman, with the practical view of a magician using those texts, there's only one reasonable explanation then for the thrice repeated mysterious characters. The magician who constructed the Smith family layman intended to summon a spirit with whom they were already communicated. A spirit provided their sigil and agreed to return to the magician when called upon in the future. I wish to be cautious in any attempt to identify this spirit. The layman was evidently in the possession of Hiram Smith when he and Joseph Smith were murdered, and it was passed down through the descendants. That said, it was Joseph Smith Jr. who told of interactions with multiple spiritual messengers. It was Joseph who died with a Jupiter talisman on his person, copied directly from the Magus. Joseph's connections with the tradition of conjuring treasure guardian spirits are well documented. I'm not particularly disposed to believe Joseph's religious claims. The specific details of his encounters with Moroni, however, suggest to me, as a practitioner of ceremonial magic, that his story should not be dismissed as mere fancy. Disregarded by many, the Smith layman may well be the earliest known artifact uniquely and exclusively tied to Mormonism. In this precious artifact, carefully handed down through the Smith family, I expect that we see the sigil of the spirit Joseph called as he made his final September visits to Cumorah. In offering this research, I cannot help but notice that Joseph's encounters with Moroni began on the night of September 22nd, 1823, and continued into September 23rd, 1823, exactly 20 years before this conference. In my mind's eye, I see my brother magician a few years later on the night of the fall equinox. He knows the rites of necromancy by which a man can commune with angels, demons, and spirits of the dead. Perhaps he has fasted a few days and washed himself. As his father later told Willard Chase, he dresses himself with great care and solemnity in a suit of black clothing and fits out a black horse he has borrowed from a friend. Reaching the hill, he climbs in silence. He once again reaches the spot he knows so well and quietly uses a sword or dagger to draw a circle in the ground with a sacred names and images. Following the old magical books, he places a leather pouch around his neck containing a layman that has been carefully drawn and properly consecrated. He stands within the circle, declaring authority in the divine names of Adonai and Tetragrammaton. He calls forth a spirit whose sigil adorns his layman and demands custody of the treasure, a book engraved on gold plates. Successful in his quest, he takes the treasure and quickly descends the hill, careful not to look back upon the burial site. What happened beyond that, only my brother Joseph knows for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for reading for Dr. Literski. Now we'll have Casey Griffiths reading for Christopher Blythe. Christopher James Blythe is a research associate at the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship at Brigham Young University. He is the editor of the Journal of Mormon History and was a documentary editor at the Joseph Smith Papers Project from 2015 to 2018. The paper will be read by Casey. I'd like to welcome Casey. The paper is False Teaching in Regard to Lineage and Matrimony, Lyman Wight and Reimagining the Latter-day Saint Tradition in Zodiac, Texas.
All right, Greg has to get his water, or I would have drunk out of it accidentally, and that's gross. So, here we go. I imagine most attendees of this year's JWHA conference will by this point have a very good understanding of the basics of Lyman Wight's story, how he influenced the initial direction of the Council of 50, how he set out on his own adventure to Texas while the majority of the saints remained in Nauvoo, completing the temple and worrying about encroaching hostilities, and how Wight, the wild ram of the mountains, would come to resent his fellow apostles. Today, I want to offer some thoughts on Wight's interpretation of Latter-day Saint traditions. Specifically, I want to comment on Wight's understanding of the Council of 50 and his teachings on plural marriage, a set of teachings that George Miller called false teachings in regards to lineage and matrimony. Before I do that, I want to emphasize that as innovative as Wight was, he was also a very traditional Latter-day Saint. He was the sort of saint that for a time struggled with the publication of the Doctrine and Covenants, believing the Book of Commandments was a superior text. Noah Smithwick, local Texan and historian, recorded a fascinating story of Wight using divining rods to recover millstones that had been misplaced. Smithwick also described Wight performing a miraculous healing. Wight had a deep regard for the Smith family. He taught his followers that one of Smith's children would lead the saints and had the privilege to receive revelation from the Urim and Thummim to do so. But let's talk about Wight and the Council of 50. Wight had been a major influence on Joseph Smith to organize the council to begin to meet with his encouragement that the saints relocate to Texas. Yet, since he was then living in Wisconsin, he actually only attended 2 meetings of the Council of 50 before Joseph's death. I have hypothesized that Wight's unique teachings on the council were due to the fact that he was not present for Joseph Smith's elaborate descriptions of the Council of 50 as a political institution. We're fortunate to have several sources that describe Wight's interpretation of the 50. Yet the best of these sources is his 16-page pamphlet, An Address by the Way of an Abridged Account and Journal of My Life from February 1844 up to April 1848, with an appeal to the Latter-day Saints. Wight published this pamphlet and circulated it widely after he learned that he had been removed from the Council of 50. The first 9 pages followed Wight's life from his proposal for a Mormon colony in Texas to his eventual journey to Texas by way of Wisconsin, touching on his initiation into the Council of 50, electioneering mission, and return to Nauvoo. This is a noteworthy publication because of Wight's candidness about the details of the Council of 50. Likely because members of the 50 swore an oath of secrecy on admission to the council, there were no comparable public histories of the 50. Wight's willingness to ignore this vow is unusual, but he may have believed this was his only means of defending his position. He characterized the 50 as an ecclesiastical organization. It was, quote, the Grand Council of the Church, or in other words, the perfect organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on earth. This council consisted of 50 members with full authority to build up the kingdom of God on the earth, that his will might be done on earth as in heaven, end quote. In the second half of the pamphlet, what Wight termed his appeal, he defended his character and his place as one of the 12 apostles, and protested his removal from the Council of 50. He explicitly challenged those of a like ordination unto myself that they have neither power nor authority given them to move me from this station, nor to place any long-eared jackass to fill a place which has never been vacated. I have not forfeited my right, title, nor claim to a seat with the 12, neither the grand council of God on the earth. Finally, he invited all ye inhabitants of the earth to join him on his mission to Texas. Ultimately, the pamphlet was the point of no return for Wight's relationship with the church, as continued under the authority of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He sent messengers to distribute the pamphlet to Latter-day Saint branches in Iowa and throughout the Midwest. Just as Wight had prioritized his commission to establish a settlement in Texas over the apostles' efforts to construct the temple in Nauvoo, his pamphlet clarified that he viewed other colonization efforts as inferior to his own. More important, what the pamphlet revealed was the division between Brigham Young and Lyman Wight had less to do with their competing priorities than it did with their fundamental interpretations of the Council of 50. Young saw the Council of 50 as a non-ecclesiastical institution, organized for deliberating on political concerns. He viewed the council as an important fulfillment of prophecy, but he also believed it was subservient to the needs of the church and was rightfully under the direction of the church's leadership. Wight saw the Council of 50 as the highest ecclesiastical institution in the church. For Wight, the 12 should report to the 50 and not the other way around. This interpretation proved very influential among other members of the 50. After council member Peter Hawes had visited Wight in Texas, he returned to the Saints in Iowa, where he demanded Orson Hyde call together the Council of 50, as there was important business to be attended to, and it was necessary that a body should meet immediately, as there was feelings and important business to attend to. Memorably, Haw then accused Brigham Young of failing to carry out the measures of Joseph by not fully utilizing the Council of 50, declaring the 12 had swallowed up the 38. That is, the 12 had usurped the responsibility and authority that Smith had intended for the 50. Now let's discuss plural marriage. Of the communities that formed in the wake of Joseph Smith's death, Lyman Wight appears to have been the most innovative in terms of theology associated with plural marriages. Some of these ideas were quite controversial, including what the polygamist George Miller referred to as false teachings in regards to lineage and matrimony. But these new teachings involved the first example of clan endogamy, the practice of marrying within a kin group in the Mormon tradition. For over a decade, Mormon religious figures known as patriarchs had provided Latter-day Saints with blessings in which they identified the faithful as descendants of one of the ancient 12 tribes of Israel, e.g. Ephraim, Manasseh, Levi, etc. Although this portion of the ceremony had great significance for Mormons who saw themselves as part of a chosen people descending from the biblical patriarchs, the specific pronouncement of one tribe over another had no practical application for the saints. Under Lyman Wight, tribal designations determined marriage options. A member of the Texas colony, John Hawley, remembered, "Lyman had taught us in selecting a wife, we should get one of our own tribe and lineage." The practice may have been based on White's understanding of Old Testament marriage laws forbidding the intermarriage of tribes due to property concerns. In Texas, only the tribe of Ephraim was free from this proviso. According to Hawley, those believed to be descended from Ephraim, the highest lineage, could save any woman whether they are of this tribe or not. For said Lyman, this lineage could have a wife from every tribe, but in the resurrection he would have to place her in her own tribe. But he would have power to visit her as a wife. White's critics worried that there was room for abuse within this system of selecting a spouse. Rumors suggested that occasionally Pierce Hawley, the patriarch for the colony in charge of tribal designation, would discover that a man and a woman previously married were of different lineages. In such a situation, a change was necessary and promptly effected. Although this proved a very serious matter of contention in White's community, there is only one known example in which he was accused of trying to break up a specific marriage. In this case, David Clayton claimed that Wight had sought to end Clayton's marriage shortly after the colony's departure from Nauvoo. After leaving the community, Clayton drafted a letter to Brigham Young asking, "Is it right in the sight of God for a man in Lyman Wight's situation in this church to endeavor to part husband and wife as he has tried repeatedly in my own case?" Whether this doctrine was as far-reaching as to divide previously entered marriages, which seems likely, it certainly affected courtships. Even then, another one of White's marital innovations would have superseded clan endogamy in the selection of a mate, the practice of arranged marriage, referred to by Hawley as the order of the patriarchs. The effect of these rules were a cause of serious contention and dissent in the community. In addition, Wight instituted strict rules concerning sexuality in marriage. According to Gideon Carter, Lyman Wight published Joseph Smith's July 12, 1843 polygamy revelation, which included many rules to be observed by those entering into plural marriage relations, which I do not find in the revelation published by the Mormons in Utah. Wight taught that a husband should be absent from the bed of his companion for 8 days during menstruation, 33 days after the birth of a son, and 66 days after the birth of a daughter. Like the concept of clan endogamy, Hawley suggested that these sexual restrictions were the law of Moses, corrected and revised. In the case of the Texas colony, plural marriage continued throughout its existence. Yet Wight did reach a point where he would no longer solemnize new plural marriages. Local Texan Noah Smithwick denied he had any knowledge of plural marriage existing among his neighbors while they were residing in Burnett County. However, according to John Howley, the reason the company had made their way to Burnett County in the first place was to escape the courts of justice after it was known that some of the company was in the practice of polygamy. Following the early Mormon practice of relocating during times of social conflict, Wight strived to limit the sort of direct threat that could have caused the colony to abandon the practice altogether. After the publication of Wight's pro-polygamy pamphlet discussed above, Wight's followers still proved unreceptive. As a result, according to Carter, the pamphlets were withdrawn from circulation, and soon afterwards the practice of plural marriage in what may be called his branch of the church was discontinued. Mr. Wight gave as a reason for this step the prejudice of the world against it, and said people were not pure enough to live up to that order of marriage. After this, there were no more plural marriages among his followers, though those who had already entered into that order maintained the wives they had taken. Polygamy was subsequently de-emphasized. Monogamous colonist John Hawley would later explain that, distinctly different from the Brighamites, the Wightites believed that all those who were spiritually married by being sealed, whether in a monogamous or a polygamous marriage, would enjoy the same glory as the others, but the ones that had more than one wife would have a greater portion of it. The four polygamists remained loyal to the colony and maintained their families and plural marriage until their deaths. Lyman Wight's colony was unique among the various Latter-day Saint communities established after Joseph Smith's death. He believed that he was continuing Joseph's teachings, but he also had his own interpretations of the faith. Thank you for attending this session, and I want to thank Casey Griffiths for reading this paper in my absence.